Nutrimedical Living with Dr. Bill Deagle and the Clay and Iron Show. And we have, extending from our third hour on our Genesis show, we have Tim Alexander, our geopolitical historical analyst, and Chris Harris, our nuclear safety expert. And welcome to the program, gentlemen.
Thank you. How you doing, Dr. Bill and Tim? I'm glad you're...
So, I want you to run through, I'm going to just read off a couple of headlines, and I want you to expand on each one. And Tim, I know you're quite capable of filling in a lot of details. You do an amazing blog at Europe Business with oneass.blogspot.com. And I'm just going to hit the headlines here, just to, if people are not in a state of shock when they go through, a properly run blog like, Joel Salenti's blog or Joel Skousen, and yours is one of the best out there. And you also are going to start launching a broadcast TV program on our live stream TV channel, which is over at NutriMedical.com, and you're trying to make it look professional, so you've got a friend that's helping you to high-tech it up. You've been doing them in the past, but I think you're going to bump it up a few steps. And just to kind of go through some of the headlines, and I want you to expand on these for this hour, along with our nuclear expert. Israel assassinated Michael Collins Piper, and I think we talked about it in the last hour. Ukrainian war, February ceasefire has collapsed. Of course, we know that what's happened to their shillings even cut off power to people, coal miners down there. China and India are interested in the Russian T-14 tanks. Red Cross raised $500 million for Haiti, but only built 6 homes. I mean, it just goes on and on. The worst aspects of the Patriot Act remain. They passed this new version of the Patriot Act. It's not very patriotic, called National Security Agency. I call it the No Such Agency, is the term that I heard from my NSA buddies back in Colorado 20 years ago. That's the term they call it, and they use it lovingly and sarcastically. Iran is, of course, sending troops to Syria. You mentioned this last hour. Tim, we've got the shelling has really started to heat back up in Ukraine. We've got the 16 million Yemenis with no clear water. Go through some of the headlines that you have.
Well, the Ukraine has always been linked to what's happening in the Middle East. It's been linked for a number of reasons. First off, it was and is an attempt to tie Russia down, to give the United States and Israel a free hand to stir up all kind of trouble in the Middle East, to annihilate Syria, et cetera, et cetera. Remember, about a year and a half ago, Russia sent a battle fleet, parked it offshore of Syria when the United States, Britain, France, and Israel wanted to invade Syria because of the bogus claim that the Syrians were gassing their own people. That put a kibosh to that. Then Israel and the United States wanted to, a few months later, wanted to attack Iran, and Russia said, and both China and Russia said, no way, this is the Third World War if you do that. So they wanted to divert Russia, so that's why you're now all of a sudden, we've had a few months where the ceasefire is more or less held, and now all of a sudden they began firing all over the ceasefire line in the Ukraine yesterday. Porky, who I would truly love to see him and Yats, the prime minister, hanged. They led the coup junta and overthrew the legitimate elected government of Ukraine and plunged their country into over a year now of absolute war. He is claiming that Russia is getting ready to invade the Ukraine. That's not true, although Russia certainly could be in Kyiv in literally a matter of 24 or 48 hours if they really wanted to. We're on multiple fronts. We're getting the public ready for a really horrific event, the Third World War, or a general Middle Eastern war that will lead to something like the Third World War, that may lead to a long peace treaty or a 7-year peace treaty. But the point is, we're in a world of hurt, militarily, financially, in just about every way you want. We were talking about Fukushima earlier, and I want to tell you, I mean, talk about a nightmare. Just a nightmare. I mean, and nothing is being done by the powers that be to correct the problems. In fact, they're working overtime to make the problems far, far worse.
Yeah, and the situation, I think, is that that we are probably no matter than a month or two away from the war getting completely out of control, where the Strait of Hormuz will close, where the war will speed up to the point where Russians have to defend their only naval base in the Middle East in Syria, and where Iran has troops on the ground. It means that a bombing attack on the live Bashir reactor by the Israelis is going to happen, and I see this happening very, very soon. I don't think it's going to be a delayed event.
Well, if they attack, and I'm sure, Chris, I'm sure you can speak to this as well as Dr. Deagle and myself. If they attack that fully fueled operating nuclear reactor, my God, I mean, it's going to kill millions of people.
Well, we calculate from the Society for Social Responsibility, and this is where I want to get Chris's opinion. This goes back years ago, that any strike on the nuclear reactor at Bashir would cause a radiation cloud to spread over Myanmar, which used to be called Burma, southern China, South Korea, and southern Japan and middle Japan, cross the Pacific Ocean and strike the United States over its central population areas, and would be catastrophic to the northern hemisphere. So people don't understand how bad this is. It would be hundreds of times worse than even Fukushima, which is thousands of times worse than Chernobyl. The word Chernobyl means wormwood, and of course this is a prophetic warning, one of the trumpet blasts we talked about in the book with our Christian author, Carl Gallups, and of course this final warning, understanding the trumpet days of Revelation. And people are hearing the trumpet sounds in the sky, which I say are due to gravity waves causing upper atmospheric plasma physics to cause collapsing sound, if you want to call it, tubes in the upper atmosphere, because that's why we're getting an increase in volcanism and earthquakes, because of the plasma physics. And these events are going to speed up as we're heading, and literally people are all around the world hearing trumpet blasts, and that's because it's the end.
I've seen a drawing of exactly what you were talking about, the plasma tubes, they call them, that stretch for an enormous distance over the world, and they've never detected them before. Now they have.
Well, those plasma tubes you can see with noctilucent clouds up in the upper atmosphere. But what happens is when a gravity wave hits, it transfers its energy. Gravity waves travel faster than the speed of light. They transfer the energy to what's called the plasma physics of the Earth, which is a nuclear reactor, into the 5 layers of the magnetosphere of the Earth, 3 layers in the outer Van Allen radiation belt. The fourth layer is in the ionosphere at 73 to 80,000 feet, and then the bottom layer is what's called a lithospheric layer that's in the upper crust of the Earth. And the problem is that it can trigger off earthquakes, volcanoes. The weather on the planet is completely steered by plasma physics. So, Chris, when we have Fukushima, it's causing extreme weather. It's breaking down the ozone layer. It's triggering off earthquakes and volcanoes because of the deep trenches of the Earth. Even the movement of the jet stream has been affected by the plasma physics caused by Fukushima. Can you get into a little bit of that, about how catastrophic Fukushima is?
Well, Dr. Bill, Fukushima was basically the byproduct of a series of events. Whatever the causes believed, it was definitely the cause of an earthquake and a tsunami. And what you have is what we're calling, it's no longer a power plant. You can't term in that sense anymore. It's now a waste generation facility. And we've been calling that for many, many years. Now if you aggressively attack a nuclear power plant with the intent of destroying it and intentionally causing radionuclides to be spread all over the world. Well, just think of Fukushima, times 10 or more, and then that's the magnitude I could think of.
Right, and the problem is Fukushima is leaking from underneath the ground. Yeah, Tim, you had something to say. Go ahead.
I just said Fukushima times 10. Wow.
Well, probably much more than that, actually, if they hit the Bashir reactor, because you're talking about a rupture of the reactor core and all the nuclear materials in the immediate area. And, of course, the problem is that volcanism around the world is increasing dramatically, and they're not doing anything. And we're talking about the International Atomic Energy Agency, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and these other agencies. In fact, Chris, you've done a recent contract with KEPCO in Korea, I think it was last year, and they're concerned about the same thing because they have the same kinds of reactors. I don't know if they did a faux or false torus hydrogen venting system like they did in Japan at TEPCO, which, by the way, was done with a U.S. contractor to do this so-called upgrade to the Mark I reactors. But the problem is, and I said this on the last hour of my Genesis show, where's our abuse? I want scientific and technical abuse. In other words, I want a dialogue, not an ad hominem attack, a dialogue with people that consider themselves qualified to object to us and give scientific, logical reasons as to why personal protection, like, for example, taking things like nutriodine, DNA protection like ellagic acid, and NutriDefense, why things like Fukushima, like putting Kevlar spider-soaked tents, using muon detectors to detect exactly where the corium is, setting up a crystalline sarcophagus with marinated water to create a crystalline sarcophagus to trap the neutrons, building up a water diversion project above Fukushima so that they don't have that aquifer running literally right through the whole area out to the ocean. And these storage tanks are a joke, because none of them are even put together correctly. They even put the proper rivets in the lower belt area of the tanks. And the sludge, they have them in literally bags laying out in the open ground, not even covered, or in buildings. It's mind-boggling how crazy this is. And as I say, where's our abuse? I want abuse. I want us to have a dialogue where scientists calls in, like Dr. Kai Vetter from the Nuclear Engineering Department at University of California, Berkeley, who was doing testing for the first year and a half. And after I contacted them, they freaked out and said, no, we can't do this anymore. Somebody tapped them on the shoulder and said, Dr. Kai Vetter, you cannot talk to Deagle. You cannot dialogue with this guy. You cannot do nuclear testing of food, air, and water like you've been doing. You cannot have a dialogue with this character because he's going to ask you questions. As I say, because of my partial Viking background, he's going to ask you some questions that we don't want him to ask you, because when you come out with an answer that even the naive public will realize is stupid, you're going to be exposed as a fraud, and we are a cover-up of a major human catastrophe that's an extinction-level event. So what do you think, Chris? How bad is this situation, and how silent is the scientific community, including Dr. We have Yoshio Yoshimatsu, journalist that brings out information, but who is the nuclear physicist that we see on direct TV and in movie shows all the time?
Who's that, Michio?
Michio Kaku, yeah. I'd like to see Michio come in with his great personality, because he has one, and he's brilliant. I'd like him to come in and raise objections to say, the only thing I hear lately is we are very incompetent from Fukushima TEPCO, which is an umbrella corporation, and we are killing you, but we really can't fix it for 200 years. That's the bottom line of what I'm hearing. Amazing, isn't it?
Chris?
Yeah,
Chris, is that true?
Oh, yeah, I'm here. I'm sorry. Yeah, I had the mute on for a second. Yeah. Well, what needs to be done now is to get serious about how to do the three things that one needs to do to clean up this kind of a mess. And that one of them is to stop any kind of reaction that may be occurring spontaneously in the core right now. Number two is to locate where the stuff is right now. Also, number three, of course, is to contain it.
Immense amounts of tritium too, isn't it? And they're not measuring any of these things. We're not getting. And here's the measurements. We should have buoys in the ocean to look at surface water radiation levels. We should have sampling with a nuclear magnetic spectroscopy to look at the spectral pattern of the isotopes in the timeline and their half-lives. We should have air sampling with commercial airlines traveling through specific air masses at different altitudes, so you can calculate out depending on the count, and then have a bottle system to collect air at those levels when it spikes with a higher radiation level. When I took my detector up 2 years ago to Portland, Oregon, to visit my son and his wife and little children, we got in within a few hundred miles of Portland, and all of a sudden we were up around 26,000, 30,000 feet, and all of a sudden the radiation spiked from 50 counts per minute to over 2,000. And I tell people, get an Inspector Plus detector and take it with you on your airplane. You don't have to stick it out the window, because you can't. You just have to sit in the compartment, because the air is literally pulling air from outside, compressing it to 8,000 feet altitude inside the compartment of the aircraft, by the way, without an air filter system. And if it's spiking that count inside, it's not because you're getting radiation from deep space that's getting through the aircraft because you're at a higher altitude. It's because you're sucking in radioactive isotope particles, and those particles are impinging on that Geiger-Muller tube, and it's detecting radiation particles that are triggering it off to say, you've been blasted. And what do you think? I mean, we need to get sampling, we need data, but everybody's shutting us down. When I talked to Senator Feinstein, this is over 2 years ago, Senator Feinstein's nuclear expert, at first he tried to blow me off and show all his qualifications, and I started asking him some questions and realized he couldn't give me an answer as to why when they shut down the nuclear detection site in Idaho, they never put one back up properly after it spiked over 700 counts per minute after Fukushima Daiichi, or answer any questions about the rapid death of children in neonatal intensive care units in Virginia and on the East Coast that were 9,000 to 10,000 miles away from Fukushima Daiichi radiation plumes, or anything concrete, any concrete question I'd ask them, they would not give an answer. Well, so what do you think of the situation? I mean, I am completely freaked out by this. I'm completely freaked out by our medical profession doing nothing. I'm freaked out by the politicians fluffing it off. I'm freaked out by their so-called experts that won't answer tough questions. And I'm freaked out by the media guys like Michio Kaku that basically is saying, hey, you know, he's a big celebrity, but he won't come out and say this is an extinction level event. The Japanese have already signed a deal 2 years ago, which is now culminated last month, to actually move much of Japan to Brazil, and also a deal with the people in southern India, in Kerala, India, to move much of Japan and its factories to South India. People need to realize this is how bad it is.
Well, Dr. Bill, let's just the listeners of this network, maybe I don't know if this is a new network for you. Is that correct?
Well, no, I've been on the RENSE network show for now 2 or 3 years.
Okay, well, I'm just going to say, just to introduce, my team. I'm just going to try to answer you also. Just say, my team was one of the first on March 11, 2011, 3/11/2011, to come out and to say anything that Fukushima itself was going to be a disaster, and if it hadn't already been by the time we'd analyzed what was going on. And I'm talking about the minute it hit the news in the United States that there had been a major earthquake and subsequent tsunami and subsequent loss of power. We knew right away what that was, just based on, because our team has probably over 30 years of experience, each of us in
your other team members, because obviously you come out, your name is a pseudonym because it's not your real name. Otherwise, you'd probably be in a lot more trouble. Right now,
I'm more worried about my family than my own safety. That's all.
Exactly.
Let's say that.
So it's kind of dangerous what you're doing. But other than the NSA, they probably don't know who you are. Your other team members, without saying any first names or anything, what's the general consensus of other team members that are radiation experts? Are they freaked out by this situation, or are they kind of like hoping that somebody's going to ask enough questions that it'll force the issue and embarrass the powers that be to start answering questions?
It still troubles us to this day. I mean, deeply disturbs us right down to the core. Our core. That's not a euphemism, but right down to the very bone that this is actually occurring, and there's really the proper attention and all is not always being. Now we've all done subsequent work in the area of prevention and all, but there's really no effort in the way of cleanup of Fukushima itself. It is still a waste generation facility, and it has not really been preempted in any way.
Right. One important statement here that I think that which people should be aware: if a war starts this summer, this fall, or a year or two from now, the very first thing that will happen is there'll be basically a cyber attack on our power grid. And all these nuclear reactors across North America, Europe, wherever that are in a war grid situation are going to go hot. And as they go hot shutdown, they're going to lose containment and start blasting out radiation like Fukushima. So Fukushima is a minor warning of the Chernobyl or wormwood that's coming. And the radiation levels, for example, in the New Madrid fault system, reactors are within 25 miles of the reactor core, that fault line, or reactors in Arizona or Nevada or up in Diablo Canyon, Northern California. All these reactors are going to go. When the power grid goes down, within 24 to 48 hours, it's a hot shutdown, and they can't even reactivate the reactors because the reactors get poisoned by the isotopes. So they'll lose containment. And when they lose containment, you're not only going to lose power, but you're also going to have a massive surge of radiation and downwind of anybody that's downwind of these reactors is going to cause immediate health problems and extreme danger. And I don't think people will grasp that Fukushima is just a warning. God's literally, sounding a trumpet saying, you see Fukushima? If you guys start a war, all your reactors around the world after a hot shutdown are going to go kaboom. That's bad, isn't it?
Yeah, that would be a very, very bad day. And
it's a natural consequence. In other words, once the power goes down, the backup power systems are so poorly managed. For example, most of the reactors here in America are even below the high water mark. Most of the reactors are also designed so that they can't deal with a hot shutdown and do a proper step down of the reactor. They're now pushing to turn a lot of them into MOX or mixed oxygen fuel reactors, which make them very, very touchy. And of course, Senator from South Carolina has just announced that he wants to run for president too, which is another idiot, and a pandering idiot from the Republican Party trying to pander to another audience. And this man is not qualified to become president or run anything when he's running America into the nuclear ground. Because MOX reactors have one purpose. It's not to make more power, it's to make nuclear plutonium detonators for warheads, period. That's why reactor number 3 in Fukushima Daiichi, which is a mixed oxygen fuel reactor, was simply to make plutonium detonators. I know, I took care of the employees working at the reactor at Savannah River that makes all our plutonium detonators in 1987-88. And I was a hazmat officer taking care of people so if they're exposed to radiation, I had to decon them at the Augusta Regional Trauma Burn Unit. So, I've been in the front lines of this foolishness, and I understand just how dangerous it is.
Well, guys, one of the sites that I look at, I spend 4 to 6 hours a day surveying news, and when you look at my site, I put several interesting stories on, but if I loaded everything I read, I'd be up 24 hours a day. But one of the sites that I go to is the extinction event, and they tend to focus on volcanic activity and really nasty, generally natural events. And we've talked about the Death Star, or whatever you want to call it, coming our way and how it's affecting stuff. And I will be the first to admit I've had 2 semesters of astronomy 40 years ago, and I'm no expert. But
we've actually went over that in detail this week with Professor McCanny. We had actually spent several hours on Tuesday. And the fact is there's no evidence that there's a dwarf star within the inner solar system. There is evidence that there's a deep space object that's disturbing hyperelliptical comets and acting at a distance to change gravity waves to cause volcanism and earthquakes and to change the plasma physics of the sun. That's what I'm getting at, because I'm seeing evidence now. We're seeing volcanic activity in volcanoes that have been dormant for a long time suddenly spring up all over the world. And I don't think that's an accident. There's a cause and effect relationship. Jesus Christ himself said, "You shall see earthquakes in diverse places, but it is not the end. It's just birth pangs." In other words, Jesus is saying, when you see all these things happen, it says in the book of Luke, hold up your head high for your redemption draws nigh. In other words, all hell is going to break loose. As they say, the Shemitah is going to hit the fan. And welcome back. And Tim, you've got a lot of really excellent, not only artwork on your blog, Europe Business, with 1s.blogspot.com. Some of the stuff is so shocking, it's like hard to believe. I mean, you'd think that, is this scripts for Saturday Night Live or some comedy special up in Orange County?
I wish it was.
Maybe you could be, if you just pull the news, you could actually turn it into a comedy act and actually make some money doing comedy, stand-up comedy with it. Because if it wasn't so catastrophic and there wasn't a body count, it could be funny, but it isn't. It's not funny. It's catastrophic. No. WikiLeaks is raising $100,000 U.S. reward for leaks on the Trans-Pacific Partnership. I mean, really?
Yeah, and what's so amazing about that? I mean, you talk about, it's one hell of a nightmare when things have gotten so damn corrupt, pardon my language, in America, that a private whistleblower organization has to raise money so the American people can find out what is in a law being passed by Congress. And by the way, that law will in part be kept secret for 4 years after it's passed. Now, to say the least, this is totally unconstitutional. The public needs to start raising 10 kinds of hell about this evil nonsense. These jerks are going to pass laws and send us to prison for violating laws that are secret. I mean, come on. And this TPP Act, I'll tell you something that I learned yesterday, and it's may well be the fact. I can't tell you for certain, but I think this is what's going to happen. They're going to use a clause in this TPP Act, Trans-Pacific Partnership Act, to basically gut Medicare for retirees. Yeah. Anytime they try to touch Social Security or Medicare, you know, the people in Washington run from it because they know it's the third rail and the American public won't put up with it. But they're going to try to slip this in. And for one thing, well, there are other things in there. Probably confiscation of guns, or at least stopping ammunition being sold, et cetera, et cetera. No treaty can change the United States Constitution. There's only two ways you can change the Constitution, either by a constitutional convention or by, I don't know, 2/3, 3/4 of the House and Senate voting on it, and then it has to be ratified by the same percentage of states. It's the only way you can change the Constitution. And you can call something a treaty, and whether it's a treaty or not, it doesn't change the Constitution. As a matter of fact, a treaty can't be passed by the House. It has to be only passed by the Senate and 3/4 of the senators present voting for it. And the so-called fast-track legislation is an attempt to get around that provision. And, you know, they're trashing the Constitution so they can rip from us, they can dump America into this kind of European austerity fascism that people are taking to the streets, not just in Greece, but France and all over Europe about. And if you're talking about getting, Medicare for elderly people out of the blue, yeah, there's going to be some real hell-raising coming from this.
People will not, they'll spit at Deagle, they'll slap you in the face, Tim, intellectually. But when you take away their beer and their pizza and their cereal and they can't even get gas to drive anywhere, people finally get the message. And right now, if you actually look at people, I was looking at a Drudge report yesterday, and it showed a guy pulling out his pockets. They're empty. The middle class doesn't have money. When they say the economy's crashing, they make all kinds of excuses, late crops, this, that, all kinds of excuses. The fact is, the policies of our federal government and the transnational corporations that are getting away with not paying their taxes, and they're withdrawing more and more credit from the economy with derivatives, etc. We can't even pay the entire interest on the derivatives, let alone everything else that's going on. So infrastructure's falling apart, so that train that crashed.
And we physically cannot pay off the debt. It is a physical impossibility for the United States to pay off its debt.
Yeah, so here's what I see happening. I think we're going to hit the wall when Greece and the Middle Eastern war rev up this summer and fall. I think that the government they have a wet dream of trying to do some form of martial law, which is why they have I call terror porn of Jade Helm, because that's what it is, terror porn. This is like a form of terrorism pornography by the government. The same way they have some idiot that has some shoelaces he tries to light years ago. So they say you have to take your shoes off and you got an airliner as if you're going to blow yourself up because your shoes contain C4. And anybody knows that if you light C4, it's good to light up, like sterno, to light up warm up your food, but it certainly won't blow up. All they do is maybe get a first or second degree burn inside a laboratory.
Yeah, often our boys have used it in the field to heat food.
Right, that's all they do. And so, in other words, everything is what I call scamtastic. Now, here's where I think is going to happen. The wet dream of Obama is he really doesn't want to have a 2016 election. The people behind him are saying, really, Obama, we want to keep you in there. We don't care how much the people hate your guts, because that becomes irrelevant if you have martial law. And I really think that the globalists are so frightened now of the alternative media, they know they can't shut us down. In fact, I'll tell you what will happen if they try to shut us down off the internet. it would take us 4 to 6 months, and we'd have peer-to-peer networks and encrypted right on the cyberspace backbone of the, and we would be broadcasting in sound, audio, video, and they couldn't even detect us on their backbone with an encrypted network. I know this from my contacts inside the NSA, inside the Virtual World Project 20 years ago, and my contacts inside Lockheed Martin and Lucent Technology. And I know the technical details of how you can encrypt a cyberspace database inside a backbone of international transfer of information, including classified information for the U.S. military. So if they think they can shut us down, they're delusional. Now, all they'll do when they try to start seizing guns is like the state of New York. The first, they did this a couple of years ago. They went to the governor of the Special Forces, and Black Op teams realized if they were forced to start trying to seize weapons at 3 a.m. from a peaceful vet that actually has a weapons system cached in his home. And last week here in California, they actually forced a man into to go into a psychiatric facility because he apparently had 100,000 bullets and guns here in California. Now, in other states, it would be considered, well, you don't have enough weapons yet. But in the communist state of California, that's what happens. So we're going to break now, but I want people to understand, bring it on. Bring on Greyhound. Bring on all these things. The public will finally reach the point where, as I say in surgery, when the patient jumps, you know they're in light anesthesia. And I believe the public is going to come on anesthetic real soon. Tim, the most important thing right now is the population wakes up and realizes they need to start prepping. We have our realtors on, Dave and Jean Mitchell from Southern California, the prepper experts trying to get people ready. We have experts like Turtles Shelters talking about all the prepping that people need to have to be ready for disaster. We have people like the Ready Store, and we just had on Amy from PrepareWise Foods. I tell people they need to understand just how close things are to catastrophe. And,
and you can't forget, Dr. Bill, the average city has 1.5 days supply of food.
Well, yeah, and also within 24 hours of any disaster, the shelves will be completely cleared, and within probably an hour, most of the good stuff's gone. So, and the problem is a lot of public are going to start getting pretty violent within a matter of days if they don't have food or their refrigerator's shut off and everything's rotting. And people aren't prepared for this. They're not prepared to see, their next neighbors and their friends down the road and other people incapable. Right?
Yeah. I'll tell you something else, too. If they come down with martial law, you have to... I'm a historian, okay? And on your show Tuesday, I had Jeff DeVillay on, and Jeff's an old friend of mine, but he's a direct descendant of the Marquis de Lafayette, who was a major general on the American side, just like a kinsman of mine, Major General Lord Sterling, fought on the American side. Americans, I know we've gotten fat and lazy, and a lot of people have been asleep at the wheel. But you know what? We're pretty tough. And if push comes to shove and people wake up and kind of smell the roses and see who's really doing this to us, there may be a shortage of hanging rope. Because we're not...
Well, I think we'll recycle it. Let's put it that way. The rope may already have some...
Well, I kind of like the idea, you hoist somebody up on a telephone pole, no trap door, you let them suffer a little while, and then you just let them up there and rot for a few weeks as a reminder to the next traitors that wanted to ruin the country from within.
That's one of the things that that's why they have a lot of these special forces. But see, I took care of people who were special forces that were protecting the presidents and former members of Congress and the Senate that have special teams to protect them. And these people are in the know. And the problem is, although they have Navy SEALs, and one of the questions they ask them is whether or not you'll shoot on an American if ordered by your commander, and if you answer yes, then you can become a SEAL. So I tell people they have to understand even former SEALs wouldn't necessarily do that because they've realized this entire thing is an ego rush trip, and it's scamtastic, and the problem is the population won't put up with it. That's why even any rational military would realize if you try to invade America, even if you're asked by the president to bring 500,000 former CIS nation Russian or former Soviet troops, into America, or communist Chinese or whatever, it'll just be cannon fodder.
Admiral Yamamoto that planned the attack on Pearl Harbor, he really didn't want to do that, and he said, if we either manage to somehow get to the Pacific coast of America and begin to invade America, behind every tree will be an American with a rifle. And
also the
don't
thing
underestimate us, is what I'm saying.
We're very innovative. For example, I can tell people, although I haven't published it yet, at least a dozen ways of making weapons out of their garage and out of things that can go to a hardware store or a grocery store that are far nastier. They can take a Bearcat apart, blow up and go right through body armor like it's butter, or be biological or other weapons that can make people blind or paralyze them or cause them to drop to the ground seizuring. So if they think, well, we can't do this, well, don't test us.
You're talking to a guy that was a consultant to leading-edge state-of-the-art aerospace firms in military weapon systems. I can tell you stuff that I won't tell you, especially on the air, because it's too dangerous. But I got to tell you, I'm not a genius. Other people can come up with it.
Right. Well, the problem is at the point where I have to actually start renouncing these technologies, which you can literally. I'll give you just one example. And this is actually from a friend of mine who was actually a Special Forces. They had developed a way of them rigging up a little linear accelerator using melted welder's flux in a linear accelerator tube to create a particle weapon that could cut through a man in a mile away. Which you can do very easily even from a battery pack. You can take something as simple as one of these small propane tanks, and with an air gun, just using a compressor, you can fire that thing half a mile, and whatever it hits, including a tank, it's going to blow it all to hell. There's lots of weapon systems you can get, even just a crossbow. People don't realize these titanium-tipped crossbows will go right through the side of an armored personnel carrier or a tank or level 3 body armor like it's butter. And,
I had an uncle that was the state archery champion in Kentucky, and he made his own, he sewed crossbows and made his own arrowheads and arrows, and he said, I would rather be hit with a high-powered rifle, and he was a hunter, and he knew what a high-powered rifle would do. He said, I'd rather be hit with a high-powered rifle slug than one of my arrows.
Some of these titanium crossbow tips go through an 18-inch tree like it's butter, and the arrow tip will perch on the other side after striking the tree like it's nothing. And people don't understand.
The people behind this, all this craziness, they have nothing but contempt for the average human being, the average American.
When we're pushing to the point where we're starving to death and we're dealing with violence from neighbors, and we have black ski mask guys that think they're going to come in tanks. And I remember talking to the Akwesasne Indians between the Quebec-Ontario border and the Mohawk. And they've never been defeated, by the way. They had to have a treaty with the Canadian government, the British and French. And I asked them, because one of my friends was actually an OPP, Ontario Police, who was actually in our home, because their daughter was just 2 weeks younger than ours and had Down syndrome, staying in Lake Temiskaming. And I asked him, I said, he was trained, by the way. They brought these training teams in from Israel to train American and Ontario and other Canadian police in military tactics and so on. I said, what would happen if they tried to attack the native peoples of Ontario or Quebec? He said, well, it wouldn't be funny. He said, the Canadian or U.S. or international government would not dare to do that because they have everything from 50 caliber machine gun to rocket propelled grenades to anti-aircraft weapons. And if they ever tried to come in here, just the tactics of the native people would be devastating. And I think people should understand that a lot of the rural people, not only in America but Canada and other parts. And I'm hoping that the people in Australia that had their weapons taken about 20 years ago are re-weaponizing, because catastrophe is coming. And they need to be aware of the fact that we're in a famine. We're going to see geopolitical and weather, extreme weather. I mean, they talk about this extreme weather coming. We're in it right now. We actually have the evidence we're heading into a moderate cooling period or a mini ice age. This mini ice age, by the way, is going to be more devastating to world food supplies than people can imagine. Just the drop in temperature of the world by 4 to 5 degrees, and 180 years ago the Thames River froze over when this happened, and they would have ice parties on the Thames River. When these kind of things happen, it relates to things like the French Revolution, which is what happened 180 years ago. Right? You're having...
And That is a historical fact. You're totally correct. But what I was getting at earlier is these characters don't think like we do, and they sometimes make some really basic fundamental errors. I'm thinking about the Sandy Hook false flag event, where
Sandy Hook's a perfect example. Expand on that.
It was a school that had been closed for 4 years because they had an asbestos problem. They did a training exercise, which they bought off the local townspeople. They've all made a lot of money off of it. They totally controlled the media and the cops, and they said kindergarten had been wiped out. In reality, it didn't happen. It never happened. But the idea was a week and a half before Christmas, they were going to stampede us into demanding that we take our guns away. And just the opposite happened. Just the opposite. I mean, every gun store was stripped of guns, I couldn't even find shotgun shells. I mean, normally there's trillions of them everywhere. You couldn't find any shotgun shells for sale. Even birdshot was gone, because everybody said, you're not taking my guns. I'm ready. I'm getting ready. And, honey, I think I'm going to have to go down to the gun store and see what I can buy real quick, And they don't think like us.
Well, we also, the problem is we don't realize we have solutions. I talked to Professor McCanney. We announced the other day on Tuesday his wing generator program, which is World Energy Project. And I just sent me the link, actually, while we're on air here, which is the only alternative energy project that will provide all world energy and 100% replace coal and nuclear and be not oxygen consuming. And better than solar, better than anything else, and it's something that's very doable, and he's got the proven technology. And we talk about true green energy that basically you only need a couple miles per hour wind, and the larger devices that he has that could be 1,000 feet high. The smaller ones can generate, megawatts of power. There's basically no reason why we can't do this. And in remote areas, you have a new distributed power grid that's controlling the voltages at the user end, rather than the other way around where the power controllers do it, because the current grid system is not going to survive putting on power surges caused by solar and wind generators that are currently being forced by legislation on the power grid and the power companies. And of course, they see us, the generators of power, if we have solar or wind, as enemies. So,
yep.
Right? It really is true.
Yeah. Well, I think we're going into a hellish period, but don't count the American people out.
No, in fact, I think what's going to happen is people are actually going to take us more seriously by prepping, by spiritually preparing, which is very important. We're all believers. By getting themselves ready to have what I call interventions to make certain that we have an election, not a selection. And I want people to stay aware. This program is going to try to bring the truth and solutions, whether it's our NutriMedical.com wellness solutions, where we have nutraceuticals and the best nutraceutical consultations and technology like QRMA, functional medicine testing, where you can go to direct labs, the best solutions in geopolitics and spirituality, which go way beyond what I call the average, quote, pastors and churches, to try to give people real solutions to real problems so we don't have to succumb to the incompetence and the evil of the globalist controllers. And it's not an imaginary thing, and by the way, we're not crazy. Unfortunately, we are too sane, most people to put up with. That's the real issue.
Get right with God, folks.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. And we will be back tomorrow. We're going to have Joel Skousen on the program. And it should be an excellent program. One of the best newsletters you can read from the side. The amazing newsletter from Tim Alexander. You can just Google Lord Sterling or just Your Business with one S.blogspot.com.